Hi guys, I'm John Moran. I'm a glass artist, originally from the States. You got this in my bio. But I started a studio here in Ghent called Ghent Glass. And what we do is public access, like glass demonstrations. We bring in artists from around the world. And we kind of like have a little bar where you can have a drink and watch glass blowing. And what we do is a lot of teamwork and sculptural based work. But the studio is really geared towards the public. And I'm showing you this because you students here, I want you to come and visit us because we're doing some intern programs and we want to have people come from the academy here and work with us and learn so you can see the kind of atmosphere that's happening at the studio. We focus a lot on teamwork and making like kind of large scale pieces like the thing I made yesterday and trying to keep it fun but also bring the skill level up for everybody who's involved. So these are different pieces made by some of the artists who were at the studio. But we also give workshops to young children and young people just to give them an introduction into the material. And we try to do as much, like pre-corona, we were doing as much outreach as possible to try to bring as many people from different backgrounds into the studio and introduce them to the material. I have some images of Marta here, who was a student at the academy, also came to Belgium to do an internship and ended up staying. And she's really grown as an artist as well through the process. And one of the things we've done through these workshops is put on exhibitions of the people who took first-time workshops. So this is a piece made by someone who took one workshop, and we did an exhibition one summer with those works. So this is all in our studio. So we built the gallery in the studio and then took it down, so it was up just for this exhibition, and then to show off the work that the students made. And I believe this is some images of the work being made, me working on my work. But pretty soon here I'm going to get into the work that I make now. I wanted to give you a short introduction to the studio because it's a big part of my life, and it's something that it's one of the reasons I connected with Poland in the first place and with Wrocław is through the studio coming back and forth and bringing people back and forth, and then coming here to bring the things that we do as well to the academy. So you can see this is how my pieces are made. They start from parts, and then later they get turned into large sculptures. But now I start with a presentation of my work. So this is pop political. It's what my work is kind of classified as, I guess. Not that it needs to be in boxes, but it's how I refer to it. And I want to start with some older work, because I know a lot of people here are students. This was my bachelor's work. So these little figures are about 1 meter tall, and they're glass bubbles. They're spray painted and stuck together. And the entire show was about like problems that were happening in my home city of Philadelphia. So there's a lot of things with police violence, racism, and to know that this show happened in 2001, before probably most of you were born. But this was something that's still going on now, but it was going on then as well. But to give an idea of like, I want you to see the progression of the work that I've made, like to have an idea of the way that my ideas have grown, but also my skill has grown. When I was a student, I didn't know so much. It was like the things that I could do, I used those things to bring as much idea into the work as possible and not be tied down by technique. So it wasn't important for me that the glass was used in a traditional manner, but not a lot of people at the time were spray painting on glass. It was something like weird, even though it's now kind of normal. There's a lot of mixed media coming into glass. And I was inspired a lot by Einar and Heimex de la Torre, who I think a lot of you met a couple years back when they were here. But their approach to the material as well, that they would bring in mixed media and use glass and bring a story to the material. So one of the things that I hit when I finished school is I didn't have access to a glass studio. So I started working with a lot of other materials and just making small parts in glass. And this really informed how I made my work, like how I still make my work. but this is one of the first pieces I made coming out of school. It was called Billion Served. And it was about, there was a war in Iraq at the time. The United States was involved in this war, and one of the financial beneficiaries was McDonald's Corporation. So they were actually opening McDonald's after the war and making money from this. So this was something that I used as an inspiration for this piece. So it's Ronald McDonald with a gas mask. That piece, though, informed a lot of the work that I made from then on out, because that piece had a glass head and the rest of the body was made of foam. It was made very poorly. Like, I didn't know what I was doing at the time, so the piece kind of deteriorated over the years. But now what I've been doing is I took this idea of making a bust, and I decided I was going to make a production line, like a bunch of work that I could sell very easily. Which didn't happen. I turned it into an installation that took me 3 years to create, and I travel it around now, and it's in a huge storage that cost me a lot of money. So it wasn't the best financial decision, but it was this show that turned into an entire commentary on the political system of the United States, because in this show, it's all the presidents, except Trump. I haven't made him yet. But they're put into a contemporary clothing. And what you notice is that there's 42 white guys and 1 black guy. And that's, all of those white guys are also very old. So it ends up talking about this idea of equality and how much of a systemic lack of it there was in the US. But what I wanted to do is also kind of humanize these individuals. So each of their clothing like tells a story from their personal lives, and it links to like kind of stupid stories or funny stories that I've read about them. And then the quotes that are on the wall are almost all like either stupid things that they said or bickering, because there was a lot of fighting even in the old presidents. They would write these nasty letters to each other, and now you hear it on TV and think it's something new, but it wasn't. It was going on for a long time. So I wanted to take this kind of aura of like the president and bring it down to a personal level. So this installation has traveled around the US a couple of times. It's been in several locations, and it changes every time, the way that I set it up or the way that I put together the entire exhibition. But it all talks about the same ideas. Pretty soon I will have to add Trump, which I'm not really looking forward to, but at least now we can look past that and to the future. So you can see there's a lot of these guys. But it was one of the ways that I used this project, this installation, to really like bring my style together and really practice the sculpting that I was doing, and I developed a lot of the techniques that I used in this on these pieces, and I still use that in my work now, but there wasn't other people at the time really doing this kind of sculptural work. I started this project in 2008, and I finished it in 2011, 2012. And Martin Yanetsky was doing sculpting, and Ross Richmond doing some glass sculpting, but none of them were really focused on realism. And I saw a lot of the stuff that they were doing and took a lot of those techniques and developed them into my own style of working with glass. And like in a lot of the pieces, these are made in parts. So all of the heads are glass, and then the body is made with epoxy and paint and fabric. When I finished with this installation, I was coming to Europe quite a bit. I was going back and forth between Belgium and the United States. And one of the things that I have been like inspired by in my work is religion. My family is very religious. They're Catholic, and I'm not very Catholic. Like, I don't believe pretty much at all, but this upbringing like inspired a lot of my work. And then being in a lot of Europe, where you have this history of religion and a history of built into the system, but it's not necessarily followed everywhere, was interesting to me. And I was thinking about this when I went back to the States, like how our religious doctrines have changed. So it brought me to this piece called New Times Roman, which is Ronald McDonald as the Virgin Mary in the Pieta. And it's also like, it's talking about this idea of capitalism being the new religion, but also what it did. So there's a history of McDonald's, was that it was started by two brothers, and it was a small burger business, and basically someone bought them out and made it into a corporate chain. So in this sculpture, it's Ronald McDonald. He's holding like, it kind of looks like me, but like a dead client, but his t-shirt is the original McDonald's Burger Brothers t-shirts. Well, from that sculpture, I was inspired to keep making these works, which have now stayed really, I'm still doing a lot of this line of work. It references historical art, but bringing a contemporary twist to it. So this piece is inspired by the Death of Marat from Jacques-Louis David. And in this painting, Marat was a revolutionary during the French Revolution, but once the government fell, he actually kind of became a tyrant, and then he was killed afterwards. But he was in this painting glorified and like made to look like a saint. So I wanted to take this idea of Osama bin Laden, which had a very similar story. Like bin Laden was trained by the U.S. when we were fighting against Iran. He was he was trained by the CIA to help the United States, and then later he saw that it was corrupt and started fighting back against the U.S. And I remember that when bin Laden was killed, people were dancing in the streets and celebrating. And I remember feeling like it's still a person, whatever it was, whatever happened. This isn't something we should celebrate just like that. And that's what inspired this piece. So in this piece, the head and hands are glass, and then the shopping cart is referencing a Walmart shopping cart, but it's detailed in silver leaf, and that's a reference to like Judas in the Bible when he gets the pieces of silver to turn over Jesus. So it's like St. John the Baptist's head on a silver platter. It's like a delivery for the American public. That was what this piece was really referencing. And I moved on from this idea of taking historical works and, again, contemporizing them. And this piece is called No Child Left Behind. It was inspired by the reaction of George Bush to Hurricane Katrina and what happened in New Orleans to the poor people after this hurricane hit and it destroyed the city. So these figures are glass entirely, and then the trash can is gold-leafed and filled with like trash to look like clouds, and it's a reference to the Sistine Madonna, these two angels that you see on shopping bags now, these two little angel kids, but it's from a historical painting. Shortly after I moved to Belgium, or while I was in the process of moving to Belgium, there was a wave of violence towards black people, especially by white people in power. And I'm having a little bit of a blank right now, but there was a young guy killed in Florida by a security officer, and that inspired this piece. This piece is called Stand Your Ground, and it's based on the sculpture The Dying Gladiator, the Dying Gaul. It's a Hellenistic sculpture that shows a fallen warrior. And it's what I wanted to show in this piece was the death of a young kid, a young guy. Even if he was, the way that the media spun it was that he was stealing something, which he wasn't, but that he looked threatening because he was wearing a hoodie, and the killing was justified, which it wasn't. He was a 17-year-old guy doing something stupid, and people do something stupid when you're 17. But this piece was inspired by that and touching on a lot of this thing that's happened and continued to happen over the years now in the U.S., and that's where like the Black Lives Matter comes from, is because there's so much systemic violence against and systemic racism built up in the system that when someone is killed, it can be justified by the media because they one time stole a cracker. It's crazy. But what I wanted to show in this piece was the fear that he must have had when he was shot for nothing, basically, and how terrified you would look. So when you would see this piece, you would come into the room and you would only see his reaction in the blood pool on the ground. As I said, this kind of phenomenon of police brutality towards black people did not end there. And it started to inspire a lot of the work that I was making. I was using images of people who were killed by the police in these pieces and creating works where they were kind of made after saints. So to kind of referencing historical sculptures and historical paintings, but bringing this contemporary spin to it. You saw this image earlier with Frederick. I think we've all seen this image a million times on the news. This piece was called Endless Night. And what it was that really got me about this situation wasn't, it was a terrible situation, but the way that it was then portrayed in the media, like it was posted around all the time, and there was celebrities like Ai Weiwei laid on the ground and modeled after this kid, and it was kind of disgusting the way that it was turned into a media extravaganza rather than a young boy who lost his life fleeing a country for his life. And when we were making this piece, it was something that I really remember as we were sculpting the parts, but at one point we were sculpting on the shoes, like working, because I have to work with a team of people when we make this kind of work. And usually it's like kind of fun, it's like good work, but this we really got, it was like very serene, and it was at the moment we were working on the shoes because they were the scale of a little boy's shoes, and it was very realistic all of a sudden. It really felt like we really all felt it emotionally, and we were thinking how terrifying it must have been for this young boy to basically drown in the night coming across an ocean, and that's why the piece is called Endless Night. It's about that moment, not about the photos and the things that happened after, but about this poor kid. I make a lot of work that's very heavy, like has a lot of emotion in it, but I try, if I just do that, I'll go crazy. So I also try to keep like a balance between the work that is focused and very serious, and then work that's also touching on like the light, like more satire and politics. And this piece I made around the same time. It's called Loathing and Fear. And it was really about the American public trying to build a wall to protect themselves from Mexico, and that eventually you just wall yourself in. So it's an old white man building himself into a little wall. But later, there was also during the Trump administration, there was a secretary of speech who was, he was constantly talking for Trump, and he was one of the, I think he had 10 people that were his communications people because they were tired of their job. But he got caught in the media, and they were trying to answer him questions, and he literally hid in the bushes. And this photo of him hiding in the bushes inspired this piece because it's such a funny, it was so surreal to see the speaker for the President of the United States hiding behind a bush when the media was trying to contact him. So it was a funny moment. Again, in this same series of work from the other piece, this piece is called Protect and Serve. In Minnesota, in I believe it was 2017, a young guy was driving with his family in the car, his girlfriend in the passenger seat and his child in the back. He had a legal gun, carried permit, and when he told the police officer he had a gun, the police officer shot him in front of his child and in front of his wife, and that was the inspiration for this piece. It shouldn't, it's not, I'm not making these pieces as to try to do anything other than try to come to terms with this in my own like understanding of how people can think this way. It's not to necessarily bring to the public or to try to point out problems, but it's really something that I do. I want to say it's almost therapeutic towards myself to try to understand how people can be a certain way. Again, there's a lot of I talk about a lot of these societal issues, and one of the big things in the U.S. is that there's a lot of gun violence. And in 2012, there was a guy who walked into a school in Newtown, Connecticut, with several machine guns and killed 27 people, young children and teachers. And this piece was inspired by that shooting. It's called Back to School. This has also changed. Every time it's shown, it has a little different atmosphere, and this piece was put together at Sick Gallery here in Wrocław. But it was, when I made this piece initially, it was really like a one-time occurrence. But since that shooting, there's been hundreds of school shootings afterwards. So this, now being in this infinity room, was important for the continuation of this, that this keeps happening. But what the child is standing in a pose and discovering his wound, and it's a little bit a reference to, there's a lot of reference to the stigmata. So he has like bloody hands, a bloody side, and then his shoes are full of blood, so there's a lot of symbolism in the pieces. But again, these pieces are made from glass, so the parts are glass, and the body is made from epoxy and pieced together. I'm going to show a little bit of work from, this last piece was at Sick Gallery, this piece also was at Sick Gallery. It's based on Degas' The Little Dancer. But this was a story of a young girl who fled again from her country, from, I believe, Syria to Belgium. And in Belgium, after so many years, they rescued her. I don't know exactly the years now, but she was 6 or 7 years old when she came over, and she was 6 years held as like in human trafficking. So she was basically controlled for 6 years, and by the time that they discovered her and saved her, rescued her, I don't know exactly how to say it, she was already, like at 13 years old, already had been through so much. But her way of talking about this idea of what happened to her was so defiant, it was inspiring. So it inspired me to kind of bring her to life in this sculpture. So it's a reference to this story and a reference to The Little Dancer, but it's talking about bigger issues of human trafficking and immigration. Like I said, I go back and forth between heavy and light work. I mean, this is my light work, dead Mickey Mouses. But these are also, this series is called Mickey Martyrs, and these are based on the Catholic saints. And one of the things that kind of inspired this was people always tell me that my work is violent. And for me, it's not violent. It's a reflection of what's happening in what today's society. But also, like, historically, the images of the saints, or like that you see of martyrs, is often riddled with blood and just a very, like, really grotesque images. So I always find it funny that people think what's violent and what's not, but when I turned it into cartoons, it was like funny. But these are all based on images of actual saints. So that last piece was Saint Denis. They supposedly chopped his head off and he walked around with it and gave a sermon. And this piece is inspired by Saint Bartholomew, who was skinned alive. And there's a lot of statues around with him holding his skin like it's a jacket, but they're Mickey Mouses. For me, I use this symbol of Mickey Mouse a lot in my work because it's a kind of a symbol of like corrupt capitalism. When Mickey Mouse was first made, there's like it was supposedly designed by Walt Disney. That's what we know. But then as Disney became a company, the way that the copyright law worked was that the owner of the copyright was a person. But Disney actively changed that throughout the years, that a corporation can actually own a copyright. And it's one thing that Disney owns the copyrights for this, but they're also incredibly litigious. So if somebody, even a teacher at a school, uses an image of Mickey Mouse, they go and they try to sue the teacher to get the money. So it's very, like they go out of their way to make it really gross, but they've also changed a lot of the rules, like the copyright laws, not only in the United States, but around the world. And it's only to benefit themselves. So it's a very important image for me as a symbol of where capitalism can be corrupt. So I'm coming now into some work that I've made during my PhD in Wrocław, and this is work that's installed in my studio in Belgium. I did a collaboration with Susan Taylor Glasgow. She's an American glass artist who does fusing and slumping, and she made a lot of the parts of this sculpture, and I made the figure. But it's inspired by some of the sculptures in and around Ghent, and the idea was that we wanted to make this kind of like a guiding light. We were talking a lot, again, about immigration, because when we were making this, it was right at the height of, there was a lot of talk about a place called Calais on the border of Belgium and France, and there was a lot of immigrants coming in there and being kind of just housed there without any real housing. It was just like put into camps, and it was very poor and very violent, and we were using that as the start of this piece. So we wanted to make like a guiding light. So this is like a chandelier that helps guide people through the night to where they have to be. And that was the idea behind it. And Susan made the lamp in its hands and his hands, and then I made the figures. Here you can get a little bit of an image of the cloud and raindrops that are also part of the chandelier. A little detail of the hand, because there's a sculpture in Ghent of an angel like pointing at God, but the way he's pointing, it's just like, yeah, here's God, and we took that as this kind of a funny image and used it again in this piece. So there's a lot of strange references that are very internal. So I was giving you this information, or this idea of Mickey Mouse. I have a series of work called Mickey Mori, which is like based on Memento Mori, but this idea of like this Mickey skull, which is what inspired the piece that I made yesterday. There's a series of work that changes to different scales and different uses of technique, and this piece is actually in collaboration with Marta Berdziak. She did I know I'm saying her name terribly, but she did all of the engraving on the pieces, so it's all hand engraved, and then we put this piece together. It's called Travelor, and this was made during the lockdown, and it was about how quickly everything changed and we were stuck and perceiving the world differently because we couldn't travel. And so on this skull, there's a map that's all twisted and wrong that shows like our complete lack, like generally people's lack of knowledge of geography outside of their own home countries or their own areas. Because I've been in Belgium for 8 years and I still don't understand where anything is. But one of the other symbols in this is a flat earth map, because there's people who believe there's a flat earth still, which is, I find hilarious. But some details of the piece. One of the other pieces that we made during this series is also in collaboration with Marta. It's called Mirror Mirror. And this was one of the first pieces we made during the lockdown. And it was about this period of isolation, like trying to come to terms with it, because it was very strange for both of us. We're foreigners living in another country and had no connection to our families, and don't have so many close friendships either, because Belgium's a lot of ways it has a lot of closed groups, and then when the lockdown hit, the people that we were seeing regularly, we weren't seeing either, so it felt very isolated. And that was the kind of base for this piece. So in the skull, there's all these details of different things that were referencing Corona. So the masks, but also the Corona symbol, and then fingerprints and teeth. And the idea is that it looks into the mirror, and when you see yourself, you see the skull in the mirror as well. And the mirror also reflects into like a coffin on the ground. So again, as I said, I make a lot of work that references historical sculptures. This piece is called Pray for the Sinners, but it's pray like predator and prey. And it's based on Donatello's David. And one of the things that I was always fascinated by Donatello's David is that it's a very sexualized version of David, like David and Goliath. And it's a prepubescent boy, but is very sexualized and kind of erotic in a weird way. And finding out a little bit more about the history, Donatello didn't have the best history with young boys. I'll put it like that. And one of the things that I had read about, I had been thinking about this piece for a long time already with the Catholic Church and the abuse towards some of the children coming out there, and working on that as an idea for on some sculptures. But during the lockdown, one of the things that I read was that the people who was really worse for were abused children, because they ended up being locked in with their abusers. So this piece is inspired by that, but it's supposed to be David being triumphant over his abuser. But again, it's glass and mixed media. But there's a lot of symbolism into the piece. There's this stuffed lamb that has it's bleeding, so it's like a lamb of God, but it's a kid's toy. But there's velvet blood coming from his neck, and this kind of flaccid gold sword. So it was supposed to be like soft and liquidy, to not be threatening, but it's also reference to the abusers. It's an old floppy sword. And then this snake is made to look like a deflated balloon. So it's like the snake from Adam and Eve, but he's being defeated, even though it's like a child's toy. So it's all this link between fantasy and reality. And a lot of this work that I'm making right now has this kind of play back and forth between imagery that is playful and relates to, like fantasy or cartoon fantasy, kind of Disneyland, but then serious imagery around it. And that leads to this piece, which is called Crying with Silent Lips. It's also inspired by the story of like background immigration and immigrants moving to another country and how countries are built on colonization and immigration. But it's referencing the Palace of Versailles, the Fountain of Apollo at the Palace of Versailles. And the idea was that this figure was breaking through this kind of fantasy ground, coming into reality. So these horses look like they're coming out of broken down castles, like Disneyland princess castles, and the figure is driving the horses. This was one of the pieces I made also for the exhibition. From the last couple of pieces are made for my exhibition for my PhD show. But in these pieces, the horses are not glass, the eyes are glass. Everything else is done with latex and with resins, because during the lockdown we shut our studio down, and we used, because I didn't have access to the hot shop making glass, I was doing a lot of other materials in my own studio. So it was a time to really explore new things. Some detail of the figure. And that concludes the talk, but yes, I wanted to say that coming to this festival this year has been really great, and I really appreciate everybody for having it and putting this together, because after the last year of things being so closed and locked down, it's really inspiring to be back with a group of people again, and really appreciate the time to come and show you what I do and to see everybody in person. So thank you all.